Picture this: 50,000 years before anyone wrote a single word, before the pyramids, before farming, before cities of any kind, a group of humans is sitting around a fire in a cave, and one of them picks up a burning bundle of dried leaves, brings it close to their face, and breathes in the smoke on purpose. Not because the cave was smoky and they had no choice. On purpose. For pleasure. For ritual. For something. Today, smoking feels like a modern habit. We think of cigarette packs, lighters, warning labels on the side of a box. But the truth is far stranger and far older than that. Long before tobacco had a name, long before anyone had ever seen a cigarette, ancient humans across completely different continents, separated by oceans they never crossed, were independently discovering the exact same thing. If you burn certain plants and breathe in what comes off them, something changes in your body and your mind. So how did this start? Who was the first human to look at smoke rising off a fire and think, I want to inhale that? And why did this strange behavior spread to nearly every corner of the ancient world, from the highlands of Africa to the jungles of Central America, thousands of years before any of these people could have possibly known about each other? That's exactly what we're digging into today. We're going to trace smoking back to its absolute roots, the archaeological evidence, the ancient pipes buried in the ground, the burnt seeds found in 3,000-year-old graves. And we're going to follow this habit as it quietly spreads across the entire ancient world, changing rituals, religions, and eventually, entire civilizations. Because here's the thing people don't realize. Smoking wasn't invented once. It was invented independently, again and again, by people who had no contact with each other whatsoever. And once you understand why that happened, you start to see smoking less as a bad habit and more as something almost built into what it means to be human. Let's start at the very beginning. Not with tobacco. Tobacco actually comes later than you'd think. But with something much older, much stranger, and honestly, a little bit unsettling once you realize what it means about our ancestors. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you're going to look at smoke completely differently. Let's go back further than tobacco. Long before anyone in the Americas domesticated a single tobacco plant, humans in other parts of the world were already burning plants and inhaling the smoke, and archaeologists have found the proof buried in the dirt. In South Africa, researchers digging through rock shelters found something odd. Charred cannabis seeds dated to roughly 3,000 years ago, sitting inside what looked like smoking pipes carved from bone and ceramic. 3,000 years. That's before the Roman Empire even existed. And these weren't isolated finds. Similar pipe residue has turned up across Ethiopia and other parts of eastern and southern Africa, all pointing to the same conclusion. People were deliberately burning psychoactive plants and inhaling the smoke, long before recorded history even began in that region. Now here's where it gets interesting. These early smokers weren't doing this recreationally, at least not in the way we think of it today. In most of the archaeological sites, the pipes and burnt plant remains were found in what looked like ceremonial contexts: burial sites, spots used for gatherings, places tied to ritual. This wasn't a quick habit squeezed in during a break. This was something sacred. And that pattern, smoking as ritual, not recreation, shows up again and again across ancient cultures that had zero contact with one another. In the Middle East and Central Asia, archaeologists have found evidence of cannabis being burned in ritual braziers, small standing altars where the smoke would rise up during religious ceremonies. Some researchers believe this practice may go back over 2,500 years, tied to early spiritual traditions where the rising smoke itself was seen as a kind of message, something floating up toward the sky, toward whatever these people believed lived beyond it. Think about that for a second. Completely different regions of the world, no trade routes connecting them at that point, no shared language, no shared religion. And yet the same basic idea kept appearing. Burn a plant, breathe the smoke, and something spiritual happens. It's almost like humans independently kept stumbling onto the same discovery. So why smoke specifically? Why not just eat the plant? That question actually has a pretty fascinating answer rooted in basic chemistry. And it's a big part of why this habit spread so fast once people figured it out. We'll get to that. But first, we need to cross an entire ocean, because the story of smoking takes its most famous turn somewhere completely different. The Americas. If Africa and the Middle East gave smoking its ritual roots, the Americas gave it its most iconic plant: tobacco. Tobacco is native to the Americas, and its story starts with the ancient Maya, somewhere between 1 and 2,000 years before the present. Archaeologists have found ceramic pots covered in Maya glyphs that literally translate to phrases like "his tobacco," meaning these containers were specifically built to hold tobacco for one person, almost like a labeled personal stash. That alone tells you something. Tobacco wasn't just some plant lying around. It had ownership, it had status. But the Maya didn't just chew it or eat it, they rolled it. Ancient pottery from the region shows figures with what looks unmistakably like a rolled bundle of leaves held to their mouth, smoke curling upward. Essentially, the earliest known depiction of a human being smoking something that resembles a cigar. And, just like in Africa, this wasn't a casual habit. Tobacco held enormous spiritual weight for the Maya and later the Aztec. Priests would smoke tobacco during religious ceremonies, believing the smoke carried prayers upward to the gods. It was used in healing rituals too. Early healers, essentially the doctors of their time, would blow tobacco smoke onto patients, believing it could drive out illness or evil spirits from the body. There's something almost universal hiding in that detail. Remember the ritual braziers from the Middle East, the burial site pipes from Africa? Now here's the Maya, an entire ocean away, doing something eerily similar, treating smoke as a bridge between the physical world and something beyond it. Further south, the Inca and other Andean cultures had their own version of this. They didn't just smoke tobacco, they used it in shamanic ceremonies, sometimes blown through the nose using specially carved pipes. Other times, ground and inhaled as snuff. Archaeologists have actually found preserved snuff kits, small pouches, tablets, and tubes, inside burial sites high in the Andes, some of them thousands of years old, perfectly preserved by the cold, dry mountain air. So by this point in history, on two completely separate continents, ancient humans had arrived at the same core idea through entirely different paths. Burn a plant, inhale what rises off it, and treat that act as something powerful, medicinal, spiritual, sometimes even a way to communicate with the dead. But here's the real question. Why did this specific behavior, inhaling smoke, spread and survive for thousands of years across dozens of unrelated cultures when so many other ancient practices simply died out? The answer isn't just cultural, it's biological. And it's genuinely one of the most interesting parts of this entire story. Here's something most people never stop to think about. When you smoke something, the effects hit your brain in seconds. Not minutes. Seconds. When a plant compound is inhaled as smoke, it passes through the lungs directly into the bloodstream, and from there, straight to the brain, all in roughly 7 to 10 seconds. Compare that to eating the same plant, where the compound has to survive digestion, get processed by the liver, and slowly filter into the bloodstream over 20 minutes or more, losing potency the entire way. Ancient humans obviously didn't understand bloodstreams or brain chemistry, but they didn't need to. They could feel the difference immediately. Smoking worked faster, hit harder, and felt more powerful than any other method available to them. If you were a healer trying to convince your tribe that you'd just driven a sickness out of someone's body, or a priest trying to prove you'd just spoken to the gods, that instant dramatic effect mattered enormously. It made the ritual feel real. This is likely a huge part of why smoking kept getting reinvented independently over and over in places that had never met. It's not that these cultures copied each other. It's that smoke genuinely is one of the fastest, most efficient delivery systems a Stone Age or Bronze Age human could stumble onto by accident. Probably by tossing the wrong bundle of leaves into a fire and noticing the smoke smelled different, felt different, changed something. And once a behavior produces a strong, fast, repeatable physical sensation, it doesn't stay secret for long. It gets passed down. It gets built into ceremonies. It gets woven into religion, medicine, and eventually everyday social life. That's exactly what happened next, as trade routes slowly opened up between distant regions. Long after these practices had already taken root independently, tobacco, cannabis, and other smoked substances didn't just stay local anymore. They started to travel. And that's where smoking stops being a scattered set of separate ancient traditions and starts becoming something closer to a shared global habit. By the time large trade networks connected different parts of the ancient and medieval world, smoking had already existed independently for thousands of years in multiple regions. But now, for the first time, these separate traditions started blending together and spreading much faster than they ever could have on their own. In the Americas, tobacco use expanded well beyond just the Maya and the Aztec. By the time European explorers arrived in the late 15th century, tobacco smoking had already spread across an enormous portion of the continent. From indigenous nations in what's now the southeastern United States, all the way down through Central America. Different groups had developed their own tools for it too, elaborate pipes carved from stone and clay, some shaped like animals or human faces, believed to carry spiritual meaning tied to whatever creature they represented. When European explorers encountered tobacco smoking for the first time, most of them had genuinely never seen anything like it. There are written accounts from early explorers describing local people who would put a burning roll of leaves in their mouths and, in the explorers' words, drink the smoke. They didn't even have a word for it yet in their own language. That moment changed everything. Once tobacco made its way back across the Atlantic, it exploded in popularity across Europe within just a few decades. First as a supposed medicine, believed to cure everything from headaches to the plague, and only later purely as something people did for pleasure. From there, European trade networks carried tobacco to Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, places that already had their own ancient smoking traditions using completely different plants. And that's really the turning point. What started as dozens of separate, isolated discoveries, a ritual in an African rock shelter, a ceremony in a Maya temple, a brazier in a Middle Eastern shrine, slowly merged into one interconnected global habit. Different plants, different cultures, but ultimately the same basic human behavior repeating itself, now spreading faster than ever before because of trade, exploration, and eventually colonization. By the 17th and 18th centuries, smoking had transformed almost completely from ancient rituals tied to gods and healing into something far more casual, a social habit, a form of relaxation, eventually a massive global industry. The spiritual weight that ancient humans once attached to smoke slowly faded into the background, replaced by something much simpler. People just liked how it felt. Which brings us to the strangest part of this whole story. One final twist that connects everything we've talked about back to right now, today. Here's the twist. For roughly 99% of the time humans have been smoking, going all the way back to those African rock shelters 3,000 years ago, nobody knew it was dangerous. Not because ancient people were careless, but because there was simply no way for them to know. The health consequences of smoking, especially heavy, daily tobacco use, take decades to show up in a human body. Ancient healers who blew tobacco smoke onto sick patients genuinely believed they were helping. In a strange way, for thousands of years, smoking was seen almost entirely as something positive, spiritual, medicinal, powerful. It wasn't until the 20th century, after cigarettes had been mass-produced and mass-marketed for decades, that large-scale medical studies finally proved what ancient rituals never could have revealed, that regular smoking causes serious, often fatal long-term harm. That discovery, in the 1950s and 60s, completely flipped the script on a behavior humans had practiced, unquestioned, for literally thousands of years. So when you really step back and look at the full picture, smoking isn't some random modern vice that appeared out of nowhere. It's one of the oldest, most deeply human behaviors we know of. Older than farming in many regions, older than writing, older than most religions still practice today. It was discovered independently, again and again, by people separated by oceans and thousands of years. Because burning a plant and inhaling the smoke happened to be one of the fastest, most powerful sensations available to a human body with no medicine, no science, and no idea what a lung even was. Ancient humans didn't smoke because they were reckless. They smoked because it worked. It healed. It connected them to their gods. It marked their most important ceremonies. It took thousands of years and a level of scientific understanding those ancient healers could never have imagined for humanity to finally learn the full cost of something that once felt almost sacred. And honestly, that might be the most human part of this entire story. We're a species that has always been drawn to whatever makes us feel something immediately and powerfully. Even now, even knowing what we know. Some habits really do go back to the very beginning. If you found this as fascinating as I did digging into it, hit subscribe, because we're going deep into more forgotten pieces of ancient human history. And trust me, some of the next ones are even stranger than this. See you in the next one.